we should not waste time, but
Let's crack on then. Yeah.
yeah, let's crack on though.
So I had a quick question. Is Taurus being approved, or is it about to be approved, or what do we know about that?
That's a very good question. I also hear about rumors. I
Hmm.
didn't see yet that it is approved. I just heard that Friedrich Merz is going to deliver it, but I heard no official statement about
Yeah.
that. If it would be true, then it would be full in the media everywhere. So I guess
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
it's just a rumor.
His
So
his statements are remarkably. I mean, there's been two revelations for me. One is that almost everything he says is like, wow,
yeah,
seems to suggest that he really understands what's going on and the full threat.
that's cool.
His phrases are stronger than Starmer and Macron, everyone. The other surprise is Mark Rutte, how spineless and weak and awful he's been.
Absolutely. This is just. Hello, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to having a legendary guest today, Mr. Jonathan Fink. He is one of the most prominent podcasters about Ukraine, a brilliant analyst, expert of Russia and the war of the Russians against Ukraine. His podcast is called Silicon Curtain, which I highly recommend, as well as his shorter episodes, Silicon Bites. Jonathan is frequently raising funds and sending humanitarian aid, military equipment and trucks to Ukraine. Please support his work on his channel. I will also put all his links down below. My name is Christoph Müller. I'm a German musician, political caricature artist and activist for Ukraine, also here on YouTube on my channel, Talk for Ukraine. Don't forget, if you want to support my channel, give it a thumbs up here. Subscribe to the channel, ring the alarm bell not to miss any episode, and feel free to leave comments and questions in the comment section below. Welcome, Jonathan Fink.
Christoph, thank you so much. It's an absolute delight to be here.
Thanks. Jonathan, I really was wondering what topic to highlight first in the midst of all these equally important topics in the events of the war which is ongoing. And there are military topics, and there are also what is going on in the information space. There is also so much to talk, and that's why I would like to start with this. What's your opinion about that?
Well, if you look at the Russian doctrine, sort of military doctrine that's been sort of revised over the years, and of
Hmm.
course had a major revision prior to this war in Ukraine, it very much consists of informational as well as kinetic. In fact, destabilizing your enemy, polluting their informational environment is a precursor to any kind of kinetic action. And in fact, if you can destabilize a country, if you can hollow out its institutions, if you can corrupt it and in some way control it, I'm thinking Hungary, I'm thinking Serbia, and Fico to an extent as well in Slovakia. You also have Georgia Dream in Tbilisi in Georgia. If you can actually turn a country's institutions into zombie institutions and gain some degree of control and get those leaders to parrot your narratives, then you don't need to invade. So the informational side is very important.
Absolutely. And that is what we have seen in the United States. Donald Trump, who completely turned around now everything the United States have been standing for. And so this has been a development which could be only possible because the people are not well informed. So information is one of the most important things. That's in fact that what we are doing right here now, giving information.
And
And
people get hung up. I mean, this is a really good point because people get hung up on the idea, and I've fallen into this as well. Is Donald Trump an asset or an agent of Russia? And we get hung up on that and we argue about that, even though there's plenty of circumstantial evidence of his connections, his communications with Russia over the years.
yeah,
We get hung up on trying to put a label on it. In fact, it doesn't really matter. That is almost, that the details of that may never be known fully. What matters is that he is acting to the benefit of the Kremlin. What matters is that he is propagating narratives beneficial to the Kremlin, and he is repeating sort of information, or not even information, it's narratives that have been injected into his circle. Now, whether that's come directly to him from outside sources, or whether that's been injected into malleable people around him, that's almost immaterial. Russia's not interested in these labels. They're interested in getting their own way, in getting a victory. So to that extent, let's park this idea of, is he an asset? Is he agent? Is he this? Is he that? Have they got compromat on him? He is acting in the favor of the Kremlin, and he is acting on balance, because there's some things in there that may not please the Kremlin, but on balance, he's acting in their interests, and in a way that sort of extends their strategic objectives. That's all we have to focus on, and tackle those one by one.
Yeah, that's true. The idea, how do the Russians get the other people, or there's useful idiots or their assets, how do they get them to act as they do? There are plenty of ways we know. It's like compromat or bribing or menacing and whatever. But why aren't we, as Western liberal democratic societies, why aren't we able to stop all that? Why do we let those things flow into our countries without almost
Yeah.
no restrictions?
Again, that's an interesting way of putting it, because again, the majority of the debate is on what Trump is saying, what his people are saying, and how Russia has influenced it. If we flip it, there will always be malicious actors, whether they are in the civic space and grifters, or whether in the political space, hostile countries. If we flip it and say, why did those narratives gain traction? Because it's true that not all countries fall for those narratives. Not all those countries are down that rabbit hole to the same extent.
Right, right.
The US is deeply down it. Some of the narratives, and of course, the other thing that Russia does is it tailors its narrative to different audiences at different times. There may be extreme contradictions amongst the things that it's putting forward, but it's designed to appeal to different people at different times, different demographics, different levels of education, and indeed different countries. One can say that some of the narratives cut through very strongly in Germany. Some of them cut through very strongly in Greece, Italy, France, maybe to a lesser extent, but still there. They cut through with the least effectiveness in Finland, the Baltics. And actually, they don't cut through very well in Britain either. They don't really work too well in Britain.
Fantastic. But in Germany, they work so well.
Well, that's what we need to be analyzing. Why do they work? Is it education? Are there historical context or reasons for that? Do we have particularly divisive partisan sort of politics, which means that people can take these narratives because they're useful to them? Is it that you have, potentially decades of certain cultivation by Russia? One of the issues, let's say in Brexit, now, Russian narratives tend not to cut through in Britain, but we need to say a big caveat. Brexit was massively to the favor of Russia's foreign policy. That's not to say anything, comment about the arguments, pro or anti-Brexit. That's just to make a statement that champagne corks were popping in Moscow, because dividing the UK from its allies, dividing the UK from its largest market, dividing the UK from one of the largest sort of alliances in the world for economic security. Of course, they were delighted at that. It weakened Britain and it weakened the EU at the same time. And their ultimate goal is to break up any institution that provides a barrier or a resistance to Russian expansion, to Russian power, to Russian influence, and to the Russian way of doing business, which is this sort of informal mafia-style, large extraction contracts. It's not a complex value-add business model. It's a sort of a mafia-type, commodity-based business model. They want to remove all barriers to their influence and to their markets, as it were. So it's both an economic and a political objective. Now, of course, Britain leaving the EU helped that tremendously. It's weakened us. It means that we have less money both to spend on welfare. When we have deeper social problems, it means that Russian narratives have a more fertile ground. It means that politics becomes more partisan. The blame game becomes partisan. So UK is an interesting one. We have many of the characteristics that suggest that Russian narratives should really cut through quite strongly, and yet they kind of don't. In Finland and Baltics, we can say it's because of the historical experience of Russia and their proximity to Russia, as well as very vigorous attempts to create media literacy programs. So these are some of the things that every country needs to develop. So they've got this almost inoculation to many of the narratives because they've heard them over and over again. Finland heard almost the same narratives we're hearing now, obviously in the 1940s, when the Soviet Union tried to erase Finland during the Second World War. So they've heard these things before. In Britain, I think we have a sort of a vague memory of hearing some of these techniques, obviously during the Second World War, from the Axis powers. And we have a degree of cynicism about things, and that sort of historical inoculation. And also we had an empire. So to some extent, I think we also recognize some of these techniques and go, well, yeah, we did that. It's a lie. And it's, so it's not going to work on us. That's not to say it doesn't work everywhere. We have a channel called GB News, and that is one of the most egregious sort of places where you can start to hear Russian narratives. They're trying to do Fox News in Britain. Okay. It's got a very, very small audience, but it uses immigration. It uses these kind of, let's say, woke type issues, gender, identity, etc. It's trying the same Fox News playbook, but it just doesn't have a big audience at all. Unfortunately, these networks tend to be funded, whereas very well, despite not gaining a huge audience, because they have very weird commercial models, whereas people like us, who propagate nothing but truth and light, don't get funded. There's no money behind liberal media, let's say.
About that, have you read about the thing, Voice of America, that they fired all the Ukrainian branch, or they
the whole thing? It's the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yes, the whole thing.
And this is so frightening, and truth is having difficulties in dictatorships. I think also that the United States are becoming a dictatorship very quickly if we don't pay attention.
They're showing, and again. These are labels that people will instantly, those who are on the liberal side will use these terms because we find them historically useful. And we're seeing characteristics or patterns of what you describe. But those terms and labels will instantly inflame anybody who is on the other side, not just MAGA, but those who are perhaps more traditional Republicans, those who can't face the fact that their society is moving in that direction. They instantly become defensive. So what I'm trying to do is to find ways to get through to them. And rather than sort of labeling it like, you're becoming a dictatorship, and they're instantly shut down. That can't happen here. We're land of the free of the brave, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. It's about saying, okay, right, you know what's happening in Russia. Some of these people will know how freedom was eroded there. Well, it barely took hold. But nascent freedoms erased there. I do lots of episodes on Georgia, and I talk about the autocrat's toolkit.
I heard that.
It's like a playbook or a toolkit.
Your last Silicon Bites was very interesting about that, about Orban also.
Yes, the Orban one yesterday, which is doing rather well.
Really
fortunately,
good.
Hopefully,
I will link it.
Let's see the end of that, fat, greasy toad who has corrupted Hungary. But looking at the toolkit, it's worth taking and saying, okay, let's look at the individual measures and let's look at the sort of process of how you go about, because not every slide to authoritarianism happens in the same way. Not all of the methods in the toolkit need to be used, and they're not necessarily used in the same order. But if we break them down and then transpose that to the US, it's like, oh my goodness, right? So many those processes are in play.
Yeah, and here we need really all the toolbox we have as podcasters, YouTube. I mentioned I'm a caricature artist. I make try to do that too, but it's all a lot of work, of course, to do those things to make them nicely and so that you have little memes which spread around. I haven't managed yet to make viral memes. I try to carry on, but there are
How
good
do you
ones.
caricature Orban? I mean, he looks like a caricature in real life, doesn't he?
Orban, I haven't done yet. This is a good idea. Like a fat, greasy toad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this image of being fat and greasy. This is always floating around in my. May I show you one of my caricatures
Yes, please do. Yes.
about Trump, which I have made. Wait, let's have a look here.
You could put goulash and dumplings in there as well, maybe.
So here, this is you.
Oh, yes, I've seen that one. That is
I
absolutely.
I showed this one to you, yeah, and that's really he is.
Now, you did this last year, but of
No,
course,
no.
oh,
In fact, I did this already 2016 when
oh,
he was
16,
when
yeah.
he was elected for the first time, and there I had written on the arm, I had written establishment instead of democracy because Hillary Clinton was establishment, and they used Trump to chop off the establishment.
Yeah.
So I published it again here for the second term. It's called democracy, but now I have the impression I just should erase also this word democracy and just leave the arm as it is because America is crippling itself with Donald
Yes.
Trump. It's completely,
It's
it's, it's,
it's gone, it's gone faster and deeper, I think, than anyone expected. Even those who, I listened to Timothy Schneider, Ruth Ben Geit, and many other horrific leftists, as they'd be labeled. But these are people who've studied the process of autocratic slide,
yes,
and they've
yeah,
studied it in history. And I think even they are taken aback by two things. One is the sheer scale and speed of it. The other one is the incompetence of it, because they expected. And if you read, Project 2025, it's all laid out there, and unfortunately, a lot more that hasn't yet happened. If you
wow.
want real nightmares, kind of read that.
I should do it. Haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it's
I
the
admit.
blueprint. It's a
It's
blueprint for a sort of theocratic autocracy.
something like Hitler's Mein Kampf, which also was the blueprint.
Yeah.
Could you compare that with that, Mein Kampf?
Um, Yeah, I mean, it has different sort of values and ambitions, partly, but yes, you can, because here's a text which is widely ignored. Many people who are commentators say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but Trump's never going to go along with that, and
Abs-
these are just a bunch of nutters, right? So the same sort of thing that was said about Hitler. Once he comes into power, he's not going to do any of these things because these things are mad. They don't make
yeah,
any sense.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, same things are being said here, and yet what's happened so far is obviously strangely similar to many of the plans in there. They are following a kind of recipe, and that's not because Trump knows it or understands it or appreciates it or is aligned with it. He just doesn't have a vision.
When
He
when
doesn't have any idea where he's going, but he's surrounded by people who this time round, unfortunately, do have an idea of where they want to take things.
and it is really strategically, and the speed is tremendous,
Yes.
and that's why nobody can react because the next hit will come as fast
Yeah.
as you cannot believe it.
And that's the big difference, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
the Austrian painter, he he was the source of a lot of the views, the hatred, and these ideas of who is good and who isn't, and these sort of anti-Semitic venom. That lot came from him, and then he sort of dragged the country with him. I don't think Trump, apart from his incipient racism and stuff that is clearly there. I mean, those who say he isn't are deluding themselves. But I don't think he has strong views, particularly on anything. I mean, he's talked about tariffs for decades. He's talked about moving out of NATO for decades. But these are fairly simplistic, chunky ideas. He doesn't have a program or a vision of where to go. So he is being led by people who are far less visible. In a way, he is the distraction. He's the sort of shiny thing you look at over here, the big orange blob that's
Yeah.
shouting and being crazy.
But
And that allows people who were not paying attention to get on with the process of dismantling
yeah.
US democracy.
Jonathan, yeah, let us get back again to this initial question we had:
Yes.
how to protect our
We're
countries.
only
How
one question in, aren't we? Oh my goodness. It usually happens when I start talking. You know.
yes. No, it's how to protect ourselves, our countries, our minds, our democracies against this incredible attack of evil, of lie, of turnaround on Orwell's 1984, good to bad, war is peace, and so on. This is happening right now in real time for us, and how to protect ourselves instead of letting our countries and our minds being flooded by that. This
Well,
morning,
first thing to
yeah,
say,
okay,
yeah.
I let you answer.
I'll let you finish the question. Yeah.
I just wanted to give an example. This morning, I was talking with my daughter about that. She's becoming 17 very soon. She's brilliant, but she doesn't care too much about politics, and she sees me doing that all the time. And then I told her an image like, imagine that you are in the Middle Ages, medieval, how you say, medieval
No,
age,
medieval period, yeah.
medieval period.
Both will work, yeah.
Yeah. Those people, you are in a village, and the enemies, the Huns, they are coming on horses and with spears and attacking you. They are only 1 mile away only, and at full speed they are attacking you. You are in this village. What are you going to do? Of course, you're trying to escape or to protect yourself. But what we do is we're sitting in this village and we are discussing and saying, are those really enemies? Are they attacking us? Is that no? They are friendly. They're not attacking us, and so on. And I made this as an example for our talk shows where we have all those people, the pros and cons. They're sitting in the talk shows, and yesterday we had a very important talk show again. And two good experts, and one pacifist, and one leftist, and one neutral. They were discussing, and those who were the really good ones. Roderich Kiesewetter is one of the.
I've met him. Yes, he's an impressive character.
Brilliant. I like him very much, and he was telling the same things he was telling since 2014 and 2022. They keep telling, and the others don't get it and don't get it and don't get it. That's what how can we get a shift in our minds to understand that we are under attack here? We are attacked. That's what
we are. And the problem is it won't go away. It's the volume and malicious intent behind the information. That's not going to go away. I think at this point we're sitting thinking, okay, this is a Ukraine problem, this is a regional problem, and there is this going to be thing called peace that's going to magically appear. None of those are true. It's not a regional problem. It's not a Ukraine problem. It is a problem of Russian imperial revanchism. They see the whole of Europe as their sphere of influence. Let that sink into the audience. The whole of Europe. They think that because their armies swept across Europe in the Napoleonic Wars, and they ended up in Paris, they think that because their armies swept across Europe in 1945 and then occupied a good chunk of Europe, which we then promptly almost forgot about, it sort of disappeared in this amnesia while we lived in our lovely, glorious comfort in Western Europe, a little rump of Europe that was left. Because their armies have swept across Europe, they think they can do it again. They don't think like never again, which is our slogans. No, that's how Germans and Brits think about the Second World War, and indeed the First World War. These were humanitarian disasters. Never again. We should do everything possible to educate people not to do that. No, the Russian phrase is we can repeat. Why repeat? Because we made mistakes last time, right? If we do it again, we can get it right next time. How do they get it right? Okay. That is, occupy as much of Europe as possible, or that part of Europe that offers resistance to them, and control and coerce those parts of Europe that don't, like Hungary and other places. But they have a mindset that wherever their armies have been before, those territories somehow they can lay claim to.
Yeah.
So bear in mind, Russian armies have been as an occupying force in Paris before. Okay, more than a century ago, more than a century and a half ago. 2 centuries ago in the Napoleonic period. But that unfortunately is the kind of mindset. And also they are an empire not at the peak of the powers, not at the peak of their sort of civilizational apogee, as it were. They are an empire that really doesn't make sense in the modern technological world. It makes no societal sense. It makes no economic sense. So you have to find some fairly perverse and brutish ideas to hold that thing together. It has to be held together by fear and violence. There's no other way because there's no economic logic to hold it together. The trouble is they're benefiting from technologies that have been developed by societies that have a very different culture, 21st century culture. The the sort of weaponry, 3D printing, drones, electronics,
Internet.
It's if you think of it almost like, and this is going to offend some people, but you think of it like a sort of Dark Ages horde with 21st century technology. It's a terrifying idea.
Yeah.
But we don't see it because, we look at them and we think they're European, we think they're white, we think they're Christian, and we all inhabit the same century. But our mindset is not from the same century, unfortunately, and their political system is not from the same century. One can't even compare their political system to medieval European feudalism because that was far more complex, far more nuanced. They had far more democracy and freedom embedded. You would not have had such a disparity in the lifestyles, indeed, health outcomes, or even comfort between, classes, mostly except for a few people at the top. They're living in a very, very sort of different kind of mindset, and they are intent on propagating that mindset and that business model as far and wide as they can. It's a mindset to dominate. It's also aligned with this period of a digital revolution, which is accelerating, not diminishing, and AI is advancing at an almost exponential rate. That means the ability to manufacture information and for that information to appear more and more credible and authentic at greater and greater scales is just going to be off the charts, and it's only going to increase. That means, back in, say, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, to produce, say, sort of, TV programs or video or what we're doing now would have required a lot of resources. It's beyond the resources of individuals to do that. You have to be part of organizations. It can be regulated. But the kind of scale of manufacture of information that is going to be at people's fingertips is going to be even greater than it is now. So if we sit here thinking the information will go away, it will not. And the malignancy will grow and the scale of information will grow, and our ability, our tools to sift knowledge from information, truth from information, that's where we need to focus. It's on our skills in parsing and judging information. That is the only saving point I think we can focus on. And unfortunately, it's my belief that you cannot do that in the digital sphere alone. You cannot train people to have that critical thinking in a pure digital environment. They have to be grounded in community. They have to be grounded in the real world and have these highly critical faculties and skills.
Yes.
Now, Finland, Sweden, other places actually do teach critical thinking. Some countries even have philosophy as a subject, which everyone should learn, I think, which is a great idea. Unfortunately, for a mass consumerist society, especially one like in Britain, where you've got extreme pressure on government budgets, this sort of thing I'm talking about here is seen as an unnecessary luxury. Is something actually. If you want to create a consumerist society, do you really want everybody thinking and being critical? You kind of don't, because they might stop consuming at the same volumes. So we've also got a fundamental problem, I think, embedded within our societies and how they're built on consumer growth in the economy. If we're going to survive this and retain our democracies, we need to find a way to revive democracy, but also revive or even propagate, critical thinking, and even the ability to basically, philosophize around information to some extent. We need to propagate that out and find a way to our entire populations. Otherwise, we're at extreme risk.
That's that's the problem. What you just described, that was, I saw a giant tsunami, a wave of mulling disinformation, bad things coming on us, amplified by the artificial intelligence, and unfortunately, all those companies who produce all that, Google and Facebook and whatever, they are now owned by oligarchs who obeyed to Donald Trump, which is not the good thing. So
No,
here we
only
have,
Google, as far as I can tell. I mean, there's a few that haven't bent the knee yet. Google
did,
may well be the last ones to go down.
okay,
This is a little concern to us because we operate on a Google-owned platform, which is YouTube. So
that's it.
a little bit concerning. But Google, I mean, behind the scenes, and they haven't really, done a lot for it. Of course, Sergey Brin and the other chap, both are of Russian ethnicity originally, and yet behind the scenes they have been extremely active in supporting Ukraine, which is not really widely known because they don't publicize it. They're the last ones who are going to bend the knee because they also would have spent their early years in, the dying Soviet Union in an autocracy. So I think they will be better equipped to understand what that is and why one should not preemptively give in. But it shows how unbelievably dangerous and spineless Zuckerberg and Bezos are, because without even much pressure, they've rolled over completely.
Yes, yes. Not to forget Elon Musk, who is
Oh,
who
yeah,
owns now Twitter, which is called now X.
yes,
That is so stupid. So the turnaround has to come from the politics and the media both to change really the mindsets. You mentioned the mindset
yeah,
of the people, how to change the mindset. The Russians, they have established all that for ages, for
yeah.
ages and decades, and now we should shift it all of a sudden. But we still have hope. The Ukrainians
We have
also
it.
have hope.
We do have hope because if we
Yeah.
look at the Nordics and the Baltics, and especially Finland, they've been doing this for decades. They've inoculated their economy to an extent with the fear that Russia
Mm,
could always turn around and
yes.
be aggressive again.
Yes.
Even in the 90s, they didn't give it up. They were like,
Yes.
we know these guys, we know what they're capable of. History comes around again.
Yes. I
Whereas
I
we
too
gave it, yeah,
I too think that in fact it's just a thing because the people are misinformed and don't understand and they don't care, and that's why they are open for this disinformation. So really, if we understand and our governments understand. What was interesting also, that you said that you in England and in Great Britain, you are not that much infiltrated as we are here probably in Germany,
yeah,
and I can tell you more about that in another episode if you like. But this is now the time. It's not
no, no,
enough.
you don't have time now. Yes,
Not enough time
that's
for
all.
that, but Germany is really interesting because we have really been on the front line. We have the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, and we have West Germany, and everything is mixed up, and the people
Yeah.
are really, really disinformed here.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
that
it's
makes,
interesting, yeah, but we'll do the AFD and why the
yes, yeah,
East is particularly prone to that kind of influence
yeah,
in another episode. But it's worth exploring why why Britain should be, because theoretically we're part of the Western Europe. We're a long way away from what's going on. But I think there are different levels of it as well. On a more official level, of course, Britain was very active in the Cold War. Um, Britain didn't go in for all the détente and stuff that Germany and France and Italy were keen to normalize relations with the Soviet Union, and there was a lot of cultural outreach during those years. We were less, perhaps a little less influenced by it. Although you still do get what I call a lot of Russophilia here. You do get people who romanticize Russian culture and don't
Yes.
recognize that since the Soviet Union, the Russian regime has used culture as a weapon. It absolutely has used it as a very powerful tool of soft influence. Unfortunately, that is extremely persistent. That just does not go away
We have that
at
too.
all.
Yes.
Yeah,
And not
it's incredibly strong.
and not to forget about Londongrad, which
And
is
then there's Londongrad, of course. Well, yeah, I mean that's a whole other episode. But yeah, we were one
yes.
of the largest money laundering centers for Russian oligarchy. And one of my guests, and he'd be a really interesting one for you to talk to, is Oliver Bullough. His
Okay.
theory is that, and this is kind of happening in the US as well. His theory is that you do not need a rule of law and all these institutions in your country if the richest in the country can take their money and put it somewhere where they're protected by rule of law, which is what happened. They
That
took their money out of Russia. There's no need for them to really focus their money and resources on building a society and the legal infrastructure in Russia because we gave them those services.
Yeah, because we are also so rules based and also so reluctant now to act differently and to fight the enemy with his own weapons. For example, taking all those frozen assets, the 300 billion euro, and just buy weapons for the Ukrainians of that. Why
Yeah.
isn't that possible still? But they are discussing about it now. So,
It's reaching a
so
bit of an intensity. There is perhaps also a fear now that pressure will come from the US to hand those back. I mean, this is the terrifying. This is a whole other episode. But where things are going, because I have a fairly dark mind. I was brought up reading Russian history and science fiction. When you combine those two together, your mind can go into some fairly dark places. And I think we're facing some fairly dark places now. I mean, there's the prospect of Trump's chaos continuing. He could always be impeached or something if he goes too nuts, or if the economy crashes, because I think he's bringing on not just a recession, he's potentially bringing on a new depression in the US, and which will tank the global economy as well. But we have to accept there's going to be many more months, if not several more years, of this sort of Trump insanity going on. And Russia's willingness and desire to project its offensive operations, whether they be kinetic or informational, or unfortunately active measures, or sabotage. I mean, we in Europe need to wake up to the idea that we have a ISIS level threat coming from Russia.
yes,
And
absolutely.
and that will only actually increase if there's some so-called ceasefire in Ukraine. You'll have Western European so-called peacekeepers. That's probably the wrong word for them. You'll have Western European armies and troops on the territory of Ukraine, quite possibly with Russia saying that's not what they want, and Russia intent on causing sabotage and even trying to harm them. So I think ceasefire, possibly. Peace deal? No, there's almost no chance for peace deal happening.
It does make no sense, of course.
No.
Peace deal would just give the Russians opportunities to carry on and to relax and to regroup. But
Well, there's just no alignment. I mean, Ukraine simply will not accept pretty much anything on Russia's
Of
list
course.
of demands, and quite
Of course.
rightly.
Of course.
The problem
But
is, will Trump cave into those? And it looks like he's moving in that direction.
I remember very well 2014 when there were the Minsk agreements, when Ukraine has been forced by those times Chancellor Angela Merkel, who forced Ukraine also to agree to this funny settlement, which has made no sense at all. And I see the same thing happening now. As you said in the beginning of our talk, it doesn't matter if they are really agents or if they are useful idiots or whatever. Doesn't count is not the words. What counts is the actions, and
Yeah,
that's why.
absolutely. Yeah.
And that's why I guess that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is now in the moment useless because of Trump. and the Americans are shifted around. So forget about them, even if it harms, and we have to make our new NATO with the rest of democratic countries, including Ukraine, as a leading nation in this organization, to defend ourselves against Russia, and also to make clear that the mindset has to be renewed. And so I think the most urgent thing is a new NATO.
Yes, European NATO. And this is where Merz is so far, his words at least, are so impressive.
Including Canada, of course.
And including Canada, yes. Apparently, the public opinion in Canada has shifted dramatically, and now a majority would like to join the European Union, which is kind of nuts. I mean, this could be an interesting way to draw Britain back into the fold, not to explicitly rejoin the European Union as a political body, but if there was a commonwealth of democracies in another trade bloc, which then aligned with the EU on a sort of open market level.
Absolutely.
But we need to fight back with creative ideas like that.
And we have to be quick with that, because otherwise the tsunami of evil will overwhelm us. But this would be the signal of hope here on this episode, that we could be creating a thing like this, European NATO, with Canada and Ukraine, and without Hungary. Leave Orban out.
Hungary, unless, of course, they, as I'm hoping, they push Orban, to one side.
Yes.
I don't know much about the opposition leader, Peter Magyar, but, for a long time, he was one of Orban's allies. Someone has to be perhaps a little bit careful in hoping that too much will change. But Orban certainly is moving him out of the way would be a good thing. It would be a blow to Russia. But I was speaking to one of the main leaders of the Russian opposition yesterday, a guy called Ilya Ponomaryov. And he confirmed what I've been talking about for many, many months, and he clarified some things. I've been saying that Putin cannot do without war. He's built a war economy. He has million soldiers, of which at least 30% are probably going to have PTSD, severe mental trauma, for which there is absolutely no facilities in Russia. Imagine all of these people come back. And it builds this idea that somehow the army's been betrayed. I mean, there's a historical echo here, of course, in the 1920s in Germany. The idea that the army was betrayed, stabbed in the back, that kind of resentment builds into a very sort of toxic and dangerous mix. All those elements are there, and he absolutely understands that. So he won't want that army to come back directly into civilian life. So what's he going to do? Well, for a while, they'll be stationed on the borders and in Donbass, but he's going to need more wars to send them to. But this time, he's going to want them to be small, victorious wars against places like Georgia and wherever he can, possibly the Baltics. So we need to think, I think, very carefully about what's coming next, even after a so-called hot peace, because that's what I think we're heading for. We're heading for a hot peace, low-level conflict in Ukraine, sabotage, provocations, but not war at the kind of scale that we're seeing at the moment. And we're going to see attempts to destroy European arms manufacturers, depots, critical infrastructure. That's where a lot of this energy is going to go. But Putin may well need to kick off other wars and other conflagrations once he can win against weaker, smaller countries, just to keep his regime going, keep his informational machine fed with these sort of, war stories, as it were. It's a little bit like the Roman Empire needing, blood and circuses. Without it, his regime would not survive. So we've got to be mindful of all this stuff. And Ponomaryov kind of confirmed a lot of what I've been sort of talking about. The only difference being, I've thought that Russia could head down into Central Asia. Well, they've taken their eye off the ball there, and apparently China is now extremely influential and may well even be giving signals out that, no, Central Asia is protected. Central Asia is now our sphere. So that may be off the table for him, which is kind of interesting. And I need to get some experts in that area. But for those who are thinking, and back to my point, that we're heading to peace and the informational threat is going to go away, no, both of those are going to increase exponentially from this point out. And if we're not ready for it, if we're not actually readying ourselves right now for those struggles, we're not going to be in good shape when they kick off.
Yeah, this kind of peace depends absolutely from the Ukrainians, if they are willing to agree to that or not. They are really down to the bottom. So in the moment there's a pivotal point, and I guess we have the chance to do it still good or to ruin it completely. But
yes,
I have the hope that we understand it now as Western democracies, where the danger, how dangerous it is, and that
we
cannot
understand
accept.
some of it. I don't think our politicians understand the full malignancy of it. I mean,
Yeah.
they really don't get the imperial ambitions of Russia. They don't get the full extent of them. They do not. Even in Britain, where we kind of get this, we get some of this stuff. And
So let's hope for Merz.
Yeah.
Let's hope for Merz. And anyway,
and let's keep informing them on these channels. I mean, it's super important to keep informing them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for having the time to talk with me today. It was super interesting. And unfortunately, I have to go. I'd like to talk with you more and more, but I have to go.
We'll do this again. So,
so
plenty of opportunity.
So all the best to you, and see you soon.
Christoph, thank you for the opportunity.
Bye, Jonathan.
Bye.